Did Pontius Pilate ever regret condemning Jesus to death? The name Pontius Pilate is synonymous with one of the most significant events in history, but few know what happened to him afterward. Did the man who washed his hands of Jesus' blood face justice himself? Pontius Pilate was the Roman governor of Judea during one of the most turbulent periods in the region's history. Appointed by Emperor Tiberius, his main responsibilities were keeping peace and ensuring taxes flowed to Rome. But his reign would forever be marked by one fateful decision: the sentencing of Jesus of Nazareth to crucifixion. Pilate's role in this event wasn't straightforward. When Jesus was brought before him, accused of claiming to be the king of the Jews, Pilate didn't immediately see him as a threat. He questioned Jesus, but found no grounds for a death sentence. Yet, Pilate's authority was being tested. The Jewish leaders and the crowd outside were demanding blood, and Pilate knew that if he didn't act, a riot could erupt. Riots in Roman provinces often meant the end of a governor's career, or worse. At first, Pilate tried to find a way out. He offered to release one prisoner to the crowd as part of a Passover tradition, hoping they would choose Jesus. Instead, they chose Barabbas, a known rebel. The crowd grew more hostile, and Pilate's options narrowed. Fearing both the wrath of the crowd and the potential fallout with Rome, Pilate finally gave in. He ordered Jesus' crucifixion, but not before symbolically washing his hands in front of the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood." But was he truly innocent? And did that moment of washing his hands actually bring him any peace? After Jesus' death, Pilate continued his governorship in Judea, but things didn't get easier. His brutal handling of tensions with the Jewish population had already caused unrest, and the execution of Jesus only intensified the divide between Pilate and the people he was meant to govern. The Jewish leaders may have initially been satisfied with the crucifixion, but the unrest in Judea kept growing. This growing tension reached a breaking point. Pilate, known for his harsh tactics, violently suppressed a Samaritan uprising. This proved to be too much for his superiors in Rome. Pilate was recalled to answer for his actions before Emperor Tiberius. However, by the time Pilate arrived in Rome, Tiberius had died, leaving Pilate's fate in the hands of the new emperor, Caligula. What happened to Pilate after he was recalled? This is where history becomes murky. Some accounts suggest that Pilate fell out of favor in Rome and was exiled, left to spend his remaining years in disgrace. Other sources claim he was forced to commit suicide as punishment for his failures in governing Judea. In a more dramatic twist, early Christian writings suggest that Pilate later converted to Christianity, seeking forgiveness for his role in Jesus' death. While this account is unlikely from a historical perspective, it highlights how Pilate's legacy was viewed by different communities. But what's clear is that the man who tried to wash his hands of responsibility couldn't escape the consequences. His political career was ruined, and his name would forever be linked with one of the most controversial decisions in history. Pontius Pilate's story doesn't end with the crucifixion of Jesus. His decision to hand over an innocent man to be killed likely haunted him in his remaining years. Whether he died by suicide, was executed, or lived out his days in obscurity, Pilate's fall from power was inevitable. Before we uncover more surprising details about what became of him, make sure to subscribe to our channel to stay updated with more historical mysteries like this. Why did Pontius Pilate, a powerful Roman governor, allow the execution of a man he believed was innocent? Pilate was the Roman prefect of Judea, a province known for its religious tensions and political unrest. As the representative of Roman authority, Pilate's primary duty was to maintain order and enforce Roman law. His position gave him immense power over life and death, especially in matters concerning the local Jewish population. However, with that power came pressure from both the Roman Empire and the volatile Jewish leaders. When Jesus was brought before Pilate, accused by the Jewish authorities of claiming to be the king of the Jews, Pilate found himself in a difficult position. After questioning Jesus, Pilate didn't see him as a threat. In fact, he declared that he found no fault in him. Jesus' teachings didn't seem to directly challenge Roman rule, and Pilate appeared reluctant to give in to the demands of the religious leaders. He even tried to shift responsibility to King Herod, but Herod sent Jesus back. Despite Pilate's initial hesitation, the pressure from the Jewish leaders and the crowd began to mount. They framed Jesus as a political threat, someone who claimed to rival the authority of Caesar. If Pilate refused to act, It could have been seen as a sign of weakness or disloyalty to Rome. The crowd became more and more insistent, shouting for Jesus to be crucified. Pilate was caught between his understanding that Jesus wasn't a danger and the very real possibility of a riot. In a final attempt to avoid condemning Jesus, Pilate offered the crowd a choice: to release either Jesus or Barabbas, a known criminal. To his surprise, the crowd chose Barabbas, demanding that Jesus be crucified. Under enormous pressure and fearing that he could lose control of the situation, Pilate finally gave in. But in a symbolic gesture to distance himself from the decision, he publicly washed his hands before the crowd, saying, "I am innocent of this man's blood." It was his way of showing that the decision wasn't truly his. It was the will of the people. Yet, history would forever remember him as the man who authorized the execution. Though Pilate tried to shift the blame, the act of washing his hands couldn't erase his role in the crucifixion. What was the reaction after Jesus was crucified? Did the death of this single man change anything for Pilate? The crucifixion of Jesus sent shockwaves through Jerusalem, but the reactions were divided. To the Jewish leaders who had pushed for Jesus' death, it may have seemed like a victory. They believed they had eliminated a threat to their authority and traditions. Yet, among Jesus' followers, the event was devastating. Some began to claim that Jesus had risen from the dead just days after his execution, fueling a movement that would eventually grow into Christianity. The public reaction was a mix of fear, grief, and growing belief in the possibility of a divine intervention. For Pontius Pilate, however, things didn't settle down after the crucifixion. He continued his role as governor of Judea, but tensions between him and the Jewish population only worsened. His handling of the trial and crucifixion didn't satisfy anyone fully. The Jewish leaders had pressured him into crucifying Jesus, but their relationship with Pilate remained strained due to his harsh rule and disrespect for Jewish customs. His brutal tactics of governance had already earned him a reputation for being ruthless and indifferent to Jewish sensitivities, and the execution of Jesus only highlighted that divide. Within the Roman Empire, Pilate's actions may not have immediately raised alarm. To Rome, the crucifixion of a local troublemaker seemed like a routine matter. However, the unrest in Judea was a growing problem, and Pilate's governance was not seen as a success. His failure to manage the local population peacefully reflected poorly on his ability to maintain order, something crucial for a Roman governor. While he avoided immediate consequences for the crucifixion itself, his heavy-handed approach in other matters continued to escalate tensions in the province. As rumors spread of Jesus' resurrection and his followers began to gain strength, Pilate's reputation among the Jewish people became even more negative. Some likely saw him as the Roman tyrant responsible for killing an innocent man, while others viewed him as weak for caving in to the demands of the religious leaders. Among the growing Christian movement, Pilate's name became infamous for his role in condemning the man they now believed to be the Messiah. In the eyes of Rome, Pilate had failed to keep Judea stable, a critical failure for a governor. His inability to maintain peace, combined with the continuing unrest, would eventually lead to his recall to Rome. The crucifixion of Jesus, while just one event during Pilate's governance, became the defining moment of his legacy, shaping his reputation as both a man who succumbed to external pressures and one who mishandled his authority. What led to the downfall of Pontius Pilate after the crucifixion? Could the same man who sentenced Jesus to death hold on to his power for long? Following Jesus' crucifixion, the political climate in Judea grew increasingly unstable. The region was already known for its deep-seated religious and cultural tensions, and Pilate's rule only made matters worse. His harsh and often brutal methods of maintaining Roman order did not sit well with the Jewish population. Pilate had already clashed with the Jews on several occasions before the crucifixion, and these conflicts only intensified in the years following. One of the most significant issues Pilate faced was the growing unrest among the Jewish people. Pilate had a history of antagonizing them by disregarding their customs and religious practices. Early in his rule, he angered the population by introducing Roman standards bearing the image of the emperor into Jerusalem, a violation of Jewish laws against graven images. This move sparked protests, and although Pilate eventually removed the standards, the damage to his relationship with the Jewish community was already done. Another incident that highlighted Pilate's ruthless governance occurred when he used temple funds to build an aqueduct, further enraging the Jewish population. When protesters gathered in opposition, Pilate had his soldiers disguise themselves in the crowd and violently suppress the dissenters, resulting in numerous deaths. These actions painted Pilate as a governor willing to use extreme force to maintain control, further alienating the people he governed. The unrest in Judea was more than just a local issue. Word of Pilate's brutal tactics reached Rome, where stability in the provinces was of utmost importance. Rome valued governors who could maintain peace and order, especially in regions like Judea that were prone to rebellion. Pilate's heavy-handed approach wasn't bringing peace, it was escalating tensions. This was a critical failure in the eyes of his superiors. The final blow to Pilate's career came around 36 AD, when he mishandled another major uprising. A group of Samaritans following a religious leader gathered at Mount Gerizim in what Pilate viewed as a potential revolt. In response, Pilate ordered his troops to attack the group, killing many of the Samaritans and arresting others. This violent suppression of a religious gathering was seen as excessive, even by Roman standards. The Samaritan leaders complained to Vitellius, the Roman governor of Syria, who had the authority to oversee Pilate's actions. Rome could no longer ignore Pilate's inability to manage Judea effectively. Vitellius sent Pilate back to Rome to answer for his actions before Emperor Tiberius. By the time Pilate reached Rome, however, Tiberius had died, and the new emperor, Caligula, now held power. It is unclear what judgment Pilate faced upon his return, but his recall to Rome marked the end of his political career in Judea. Whether he was formally punished or allowed to live in obscurity, one thing was clear. Pilate's rule had been a failure, and his career was effectively over. The crucifixion of Jesus may have been the most famous event of Pilate's time as governor, but it was his overall inability to govern effectively that led to his downfall. His mishandling of Jewish unrest, repeated acts of brutality, and failure to maintain peace ultimately sealed his fate, leading to his recall and the end of his time in power. What happened to Pontius Pilate after he was recalled to Rome? Did he live out his days in disgrace, or was his end even more tragic? There are several theories, some based on historical accounts, others on legend, that attempt to explain what became of the man who sentenced Jesus to death. One of the most widely accepted theories is that Pilate was exiled and eventually took his own life. After being recalled to Rome by Emperor Tiberius due to his mishandling of Jewish unrest, Pilate found himself in a precarious position. By the time he arrived in Rome, Tiberius had died, and the new emperor, Caligula, was in power. Some historical sources suggest that Pilate faced disgrace for his failures in Judea, particularly for his brutal suppression of the Samaritan uprising, which had angered both the local population and Roman authorities. According to these accounts, Pilate was stripped of his political status and exiled, possibly to a remote location in Gaul, modern-day France. In this version of events, Pilate's shame and the weight of his role in the crucifixion of Jesus may have driven him to suicide. Some historians believe Pilate could not cope with the political downfall and personal guilt, leading him to end his own life. This theory of exile and suicide is reflected in the writings of early historians such as Eusebius and is the most commonly accepted narrative in both secular and religious circles. An alternative account comes from early Christian tradition, which offers a more redemptive ending for Pilate. According to some legends, Pilate eventually came to regret his role in Jesus' death and, in time, converted to Christianity. These traditions suggest that Pilate sought forgiveness and, in a dramatic turn of events, was ultimately forgiven for his actions. In certain Christian writings, Pilate is even portrayed as a martyr. The Ethiopian Orthodox Church, for instance, goes as far as venerating Pilate as a saint, claiming that both he and his wife, Claudia Procula, became followers of Christ. Pilate's wife is sometimes said to have warned him not to harm Jesus after having a troubling dream, which adds another layer of complexity to this theory. Though this account is more legendary than historical, it reflects the desire of early Christians to believe in the possibility of redemption, even for someone as reviled as Pilate. Another theory suggests that Pilate didn't escape punishment after his recall to Rome. Under the rule of Emperor Caligula, known for his erratic and often brutal reign, some sources claim that Pilate faced execution. In this version, Caligula saw Pilate's failure to maintain order in Judea as a serious political misstep. Caligula, who had little tolerance for those who couldn't uphold Roman authority, may have seen Pilate as a liability and ordered his execution. Though this account lacks solid historical evidence, it aligns with the reputation of Caligula as a ruler who swiftly dealt with those who displeased him. Pilate's inability to handle the unrest in Judea, particularly with the growing tensions following Jesus' crucifixion, may have sealed his fate. If this theory is true, Pilate's life ended not by his own hand, but by the order of an unforgiving emperor. Pontius Pilate's ultimate fate remains shrouded in mystery, with several competing accounts of his final days. Whether he died by suicide, was forgiven and converted, or faced execution at the hands of Emperor Caligula, one thing is clear. Pilate's role in the crucifixion of Jesus left a lasting mark on his legacy. His name, tied to one of history's most significant events, would forever be remembered with a mix of tragedy, guilt, and mystery. Pontius Pilate occupies a controversial place in both history and religion. As the Roman governor who authorized the crucifixion of Jesus, he stands at the center of one of the most pivotal events in Christianity. His decision to condemn Jesus, despite believing him innocent, has sparked debates among historians, theologians, and religious scholars for centuries. Was Pilate a weak leader who bowed to the will of the crowd, or a calculating politician seeking to maintain peace at any cost? In the Christian tradition, Pilate's role is often viewed through a moral lens. He is portrayed as the man who could have saved Jesus but chose not to, ultimately symbolizing the worldly powers that opposed Christ. His act of washing his hands, a symbolic gesture to absolve himself of guilt, has come to represent a failure of moral courage. Even today, the phrase washing your hands of something is used to describe someone avoiding responsibility for a difficult decision. Historically, Pilate's actions are seen in the context of Roman rule. His primary concern was maintaining order in a volatile province, and from a political perspective, his decision to crucify Jesus was likely seen as a necessary move to prevent unrest. However, Pilate's harsh methods of governance and inability to manage Jewish tensions effectively damaged his standing with both the local population and Roman authorities. The crucifixion may have been one of many decisions, but it's the one that defined his legacy. Pilate's portrayal in religious texts is complex. In the New Testament, he is depicted as a reluctant figure, seemingly caught between his own judgment and the pressure from Jewish leaders and the crowd. The Gospels present him as hesitant to condemn Jesus, but ultimately swayed by political expediency. Some early Christian traditions viewed him as a tragic figure, while others saw him as a villain. In popular culture, Pilate has been portrayed in various ways, from a conflicted leader to a ruthless authority figure. Films, plays, and books have explored his character, often focusing on the moral dilemma he faced during Jesus' trial. His story has been retold countless times, always with the same question at the heart. Could Pilate have changed the course of history had he made a different decision? Pontius Pilate's story remains a powerful reflection on the complexities of leadership, morality, and responsibility. He was a man faced with an impossible choice, one that would not only define his own fate, but alter the course of history. The unanswered questions surrounding his life after the crucifixion only add to the intrigue. Was he tormented by guilt? Punished by Rome? Or did he seek redemption? What we do know is that Pilate's decision to crucify Jesus transformed his legacy forever. He went from being a relatively obscure Roman governor to a figure of immense historical and religious significance. Whether seen as a coward who caved to pressure or a governor trying to keep peace, his name is forever linked with one of the most profound events in human history. Pontius Pilate's legacy endures as a reminder of how a single decision, made under pressure, can shape the fate of an individual and the world.